Hi, welcome to today's On This Day in Tudor History. I'm Claire Ridgway, founder of the Tudor Society and Anne Boleyn Files websites, also author of the book that has actually inspired these On This Day in Tudor History videos. So what happened on this day in Tudor history? Well, on this day, the 26th of February 1564, poet, translator and playwright Christopher Marlowe, who you may have heard of because he is a very famous playwright, was baptised at the Church of St George the Martyr in Canterbury in Kent in England. Now, his exact date of birth is not known, and that's quite normal for the Tudor period because it wasn't law that you had to register births. But usually a baby in Tudor times was baptised very quickly within 2 to 3 days of their birth. So he would have been born just a few days before the 26th of February 1564. Now, Christopher Marlowe, or Kit Marlowe as he's often known, his nickname Kit, was the second of 9 children and the eldest son of John Marlowe, who was a shoemaker, and his wife Catherine, her maiden name being Arthur, Catherine Arthur. Now, Marlowe was educated at King's School, Canterbury, and then he went on to Corpus Christi College, one of Cambridge University's colleges. He actually managed to get a scholarship to attend there. He was awarded the Parker Scholarship, which was endowed by Matthew Parker, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury in Elizabeth I's reign. And this scholarship was awarded to King's School students who were particularly gifted at grammar and verse and things like that. So he was obviously very gifted with language. He graduated MA from Corpus Christi in 1587, although it's not known precisely what he studied. Now, Marlowe, of course, is best known for his literary works, his plays and poems. They include Tamburlaine, Dr. Faustus, the Jew of Malta, Edward II, Massacre at Paris, The Passionate Shepherd to His Love, and also Hero and Leander. The famous Elizabethan actor Edward Alleyn played lead parts in Dr. Faustus, Tamburlaine, the Jew of Malta, and also the Massacre at Paris. And some people even believe that Marlowe actually wrote some of his roles, some of the parts, actually with Alleyn in mind. So Alleyn kind of inspired Marlowe to write those roles. My favourite of Marlowe's works is Dr. Faustus, which I did actually study. That's probably why I love it, because I studied it and really enjoyed it. And I love, I'll give you a link to one of the versions I love is Richard Burton in the role. And Elizabeth Taylor does a cameo of Helen of Troy in it. And there's you can actually see the scene in a YouTube video. I'll give you a link to that because it really is a brilliant scene. I just love it. So I'll give you a link to that. But if you ever get a chance to see Dr. Faustus performed, then do go and see it. It really is a wonderful play. Now, Marlowe, as well as being, this playwright and this poet and also a translator, he was actually a rather colourful character. Now, some believe him to have been a spy who worked for Sir Francis Walsingham, who, of course, was Queen Elizabeth I's, her spy master general. So some people believe that he worked for Walsingham and the English government, and that he moved around in Catholic circles trying to gather information which he then passed on to Walsingham and the government. His biographer on the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, Charles Nicholl, writes that 4 men later associated with Marlowe, Richard Baines, Robert Poley, Thomas Watson and Thomas Walsingham were all involved in intelligence work in France during the 1580s. And he notes that Marlowe appears to have been absent from his studies at Corpus Christi, Cambridge, at several times. So perhaps he was away on government business, or rather spying. So perhaps so. But that isn't the only thing that's said about Christopher Marlowe. There are also allegations made against him that he was a heretic and an atheist, which of course were very serious allegations in those times where religion was everything. Religion ruled your daily life. A former friend of Marlowe, Richard Baines, actually made a list of 19 instances of Marlowe's atheistic and seditious talk. Baines delivered this list of instances to authorities just a few days before Marlowe's death in 1593. Playwright Robert Greene accused Marlowe of saying, "There is no God." And he was also accused of homosexual blasphemy. He said, allegedly, that Jesus had committed sodomy with St. John. He also called Christ a bastard and his mother Mary dishonest. And he also was allegedly heard to say that the sacrament would have been much better if it had been administered in a tobacco pipe. And of course, all of this is very scandalous. That's serious blasphemy. Had Marlowe lived, there was only a few days between these complaints against him and his death. Had he lived, then he could have faced serious charges, got into real trouble. But Marlowe also appears to have been a bit of a magnet for trouble. In 1589, he was involved in a bit of a brawl, a fight using a sword and dagger. This fight was with a man called William Bradley, who was the son of an innkeeper. Marlowe and his friend Thomas Watson were committed to Newgate prison after this fight, but they were released after the coroner recorded a verdict of self-defence. I think Watson stayed in prison slightly longer than Marlowe, but they were both eventually released. And then a few years later, 1592, he was involved in a street fight. He assaulted a tailor with a staff and dagger. He was apprehended, he appeared in court, but the case was adjourned and eventually came to nothing, luckily for him. But then we have his end, and this character was colourful to the last, because on the 30th of May 1593, Christopher Marlowe, who was 29 years old at the time, was stabbed to death at a house in Deptford Strand in London. Now, it was described as a tavern brawl, but actually the assault actually happened in a private room of the house, so it wasn't really a tavern brawl. Now, Marlowe and a man named Ingram Fraser had been arguing over the bill, or a bill, when Marlowe was said to have grabbed Ingram's dagger and struck him twice about the head with the dagger. Apparently, Ingram just suffered shallow wounds, but the two men obviously had a fight over this then. Marlowe had attacked Ingram, and Ingram then stabbed Marlowe above his right eye, and it was a very deep wound, and Marlowe died instantly. But the coroner ruled that Ingram's assault on Marlowe had been in self-defence, which, from that story sounds credible. However, historian Charles Nicholl wonders whether there's actually more to the story. He notes that the witnesses that were called at the inquest were a swindler and a Walsingham spy, who were both known liars, so may not have been telling the truth about what really happened in that room. Now, there are several theories regarding Marlowe's death. One, that it was simply a brawl like the others that Marlowe had had in the past, but obviously this one was more serious and ended up in Marlowe being killed. Two, that it was all down to his alleged homosexuality and down to jealousy, that his death might have been arranged by Audrey Walsingham, wife of his friend Thomas Walsingham, who'd become jealous of the men's close relationship, or that Ingram Frizzer, who was Walsingham's servant, killed Marlowe to protect his master's reputation because his master was seen as being a little bit too close to Marlowe. Or three, that it was all down to religious views, Marlowe's plays being seen as Catholic propaganda, or due to his atheism, that, he was done away with because of that. Or four, that he was assassinated to prevent him naming men close to the Queen, men who were Privy Council members who were fellow atheists. Five, that Sir Walter Raleigh, who was also linked to atheism, plotted his death so that Marlowe wouldn't go on to implicate Sir Walter Raleigh when Marlowe was apprehended because of these 19 instances that, had been alleged against him. Or finally, number 6 theory, that the Queen herself arranged his death due to his atheism. That doesn't sound at all plausible to me, but there you go. So I don't know which theory you believe. It's hard to know what happened unless we go back in time as a fly on the wall and see what happened on that day. Now, Marlowe was buried at St Nicholas's Church in Deptford on the 1st of June 1593, but we do not know the exact location of his resting place, which seems very sad that this big literary figure, we can't visit his actual tomb. Now, a little bit of trivia now. Some people who call themselves Marlovians actually believe that Kit Marlowe was responsible for the works that we now know as Shakespeare's works. They were attributed to William Shakespeare, but some people believe that Christopher Marlowe was actually the literary genius behind those works. So I'd be interested to know what you think of that, whether I've got any Marlovians watching this video. It'd be interesting to hear from you. So that's the story of Christopher Marlowe, who was baptised on this day in history, the 26th of February 1564 at St George the Martyr Church in Canterbury. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back tomorrow with another video. You can subscribe just somewhere down there, the button that says subscribe, and you can, of course, hit the bell to be notified of future videos. Take care. Bye-bye.